The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Melissa Jenkins struggled to button her blazer. Her fingers, usually nimble and precise, fumbled with the simple task as exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. 8-month-old Liam had been up most of the night with a fever, and the dark circles under her eyes told the story that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Today was important. Her presentation to the executive team could mean a promotion, something she desperately needed as a single mother with mounting bills. "You be good for Mrs. Wilson today, okay?" Melissa whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to Liam's forehead before handing him to her elderly neighbor. The baby cooed in response, his bright blue eyes, so much like his father's, twinkling with innocent joy. Those eyes were a constant reminder of what she had lost, or rather what she had never truly had. "Don't you worry about a thing, dear," Mrs. Wilson said, her weathered hands expertly cradling the infant. "You go knock 'em dead at that fancy office of yours." The subway was crowded as usual, bodies pressed against each other in uncomfortable proximity. Melissa clutched her portfolio tight against her chest, mentally rehearsing the key points of her marketing strategy. Hartwell Industries was one of the largest financial services firms in New York, and landing the junior executive position would mean better healthcare, flexible hours, and a salary that could provide Liam with the future he deserved. When she arrived at the gleaming skyscraper, Melissa squared her shoulders and stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 42nd floor. The reflection in the polished doors showed a woman trying hard to project confidence. Designer suit from a consignment shop, hair pulled back in a neat bun, expression carefully neutral. Nobody needed to know that beneath this facade was a woman who had spent the night pacing with a feverish baby, or that her pantry was nearly empty, or that she was one missed paycheck away from disaster. "Well, look who made it in today," came a voice as Melissa entered the office. Jessica Winters, with her perfect blonde hair and family connections that had fast-tracked her career, leaned against the reception desk. "Rough night with the mystery baby?" Her voice carried just enough to ensure others heard, causing several heads to turn. "Good morning, Jessica," Melissa replied evenly, ignoring the bait. The office rumor mill had been working overtime since her maternity leave. Who was the father? Why wasn't he in the picture? Was she really executive material with a baby at home? The whispers followed her down every corridor. "Conference room A in 10 minutes, Jessica added with a saccharine smile. "Try not to be late this time. I've already set up the projector for you. Wouldn't want any technical difficulties to distract from your big moment." Melissa nodded her thanks, knowing full well that Jessica's help usually came with strings attached. As she settled at her desk to review her notes one final time, her phone buzzed with a text from the daycare. Liam's fever was back. Her heart sank as she quickly texted Mrs. Wilson that she would come as soon as possible after her presentation. The conference room was already half filled when she arrived. Jessica sat near the head of the table, chatting animatedly with Ryan Foster, the marketing director. Other department heads filtered in, taking their seats with the casual confidence of people who didn't have to prove their worth daily. "Melissa, just in time?" Ryan called out, checking his watch pointedly. "We were about to start without you." "Sorry for cutting it close," she said, connecting her laptop to the projector. As the screen flickered to life, her heart stopped. Instead of her meticulously prepared presentation, the screen displayed a photo of her holding Liam in the hospital, exhausted but beaming with new mother joy. Gasps and poorly concealed snickers rippled through the room. Jessica's expression of mock concern didn't quite mask her satisfaction. "Oh my, wrong file," Jessica asked innocently. "How awkward." Melissa's cheeks burned as she quickly disconnected her laptop, hands trembling. She had never shown personal photos at work, keeping her professional and private lives strictly separate. Someone had deliberately accessed her files. "Technical difficulties," Ryan sighed, looking annoyed. "Can someone else go first while Melissa sorts this out?" Before anyone could volunteer, the conference room door opened. The conversation immediately died as James Hartwell himself walked in, the CEO who rarely attended departmental meetings, whose presence on the 42nd floor was usually announced well in advance. At 42, James had the commanding presence that came with being born into wealth and power, yet had earned respect through shrewd business decisions that had doubled the company's value since he'd taken over from his father. "Please don't stop on my account," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "I thought I'd sit in today." His eyes scanned the faces around the table, lingering momentarily on Melissa, before taking a seat at the head of the table. The air in the room seemed to thicken as everyone straightened in their chairs. James Hartwell was known for his exacting standards and little patience for incompetence. Melissa felt her chance at promotion slipping away as she fumbled with her backup flash drive. "I believe Miss Jenkins was about to present," James said, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. "Yes, sir, but she's having some technical issues," Ryan explained, shooting Melissa a look that said, "Fix this now." "Actually," Melissa said, finding her voice as she plugged in the flash drive, "I'm ready." The correct presentation appeared on screen, and she took a deep breath. This was her moment, baby drama or not. For the next 15 minutes, Melissa outlined her strategy for targeting millennial clients, her voice growing stronger with each slide. The room, initially tense with second-hand embarrassment, gradually shifted as the executives leaned forward, engaged by her data-driven approach and innovative solutions. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Ryan began the questions. Each challenge was met with a thoughtful, prepared response until even Jessica's attempts to poke holes in her proposal fell flat. "Impressive work, Ms. Jenkins," James finally said, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to see more detailed projections for the third quarter. Can you have those on my desk by tomorrow?" "Absolutely, Mr. Hartwell," Melissa replied, her heart racing with a mixture of pride and relief. As the meeting adjourned, Melissa quickly packed up her materials, anxious to check on Liam. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Mrs. Wilson. "Melissa," James called as others filed out, "a word, please." She watched the door close behind the last executive, leaving her alone with the CEO. James Hartwell stood by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline. "Your presentation was excellent," he said without turning, "but I'm more interested in that first image that appeared on screen." Melissa's stomach dropped. "Sir, I apologize for the unprofessional—" "The baby," he interrupted, finally turning to face her. His expression had changed completely. Gone was the impassive business leader, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Your son, how old is he?" 8 months, she answered cautiously, unsure where this was going. James moved closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. 8 months, he repeated softly. "Born in October, then." "January," she corrected automatically. Something flashed in his eyes. Recognition, calculation, shock. "January," he echoed, 9 months after the Denver conference. The blood drained from Melissa's face as the implication of his words hit her. The Denver conference. The night she'd thrown caution to the wind with a charming stranger at the hotel bar, not realizing until the next morning that he was James Hartwell, attending under a different name badge to evaluate staff without the pressure of his title. The night that had given her Liam. "Those eyes," James whispered, more to himself than to her. "I should have recognized them immediately." Melissa felt the ground shift beneath her feet as reality rearranged itself. The conference room suddenly seemed too small, too airless. James Hartwell, billionaire CEO, notorious workaholic, and the subject of countless business magazine profiles, was connecting dots she had deliberately kept separate. "I don't understand what you're implying," she said carefully, though her racing heart betrayed her. The Denver conference had been a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment during a particularly vulnerable time in her life. She had just been promoted, excited and nervous about her new role, when she'd met the charming, attentive man who introduced himself simply as James. No last name, no title, just warm blue eyes and conversation that made her feel seen for the first time in years. "I think you do understand, Melissa," James replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Denver, the majestic hotel bar. You were celebrating your promotion to the marketing team." Memories flooded back. The way he'd remembered every detail she shared about her life, how he'd made her laugh until her sides hurt. The connection that felt simultaneously impossible and inevitable. They had agreed it was one night only. No strings, no expectations, no exchange of personal information beyond first names. By the time she'd discovered his true identity the next morning, he had already checked out. "That was a long time ago," Melissa managed, gripping the edge of the conference table for support. "What does it have to do with my presentation today?" James stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of grey in his otherwise jet-black hair, the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in Denver. 8 months old, Born in January. Those eyes, they're the same as my mother's, the same as mine. Mr.
Hartwell, is he mine, Melissa?
The question hung in the air between them, impossible to evade any longer. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again, Mrs. Wilson's number flashing on the screen with increasing urgency. Maternal instinct overrode professional caution as she answered. Melissa, I'm so sorry to interrupt your work, but Liam's fever has spiked to 103. Mrs. Wilson's worried voice came through. I think he needs to see a doctor right away. I'm leaving now, Melissa said, already gathering her things, all thoughts of career advancement and office politics vanishing in the face of her son's needs. Tell him Mummy's coming. She ended the call and turned to find James watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, curiosity, and something else, something more complex. I have to go, she said firmly. My son is sick. Our son, James corrected quietly, the words landing like stones in still water. Let me drive you. That's not necessary. It wasn't a request, Melissa. His tone shifted to the authoritative one she recognized from company-wide meetings. My car is in the basement garage. We can be there in half the time it would take you by subway. She wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful boundaries she'd constructed between her personal life and work life, between Liam and his biological father. But Liam's fever trumped her pride. She nodded once, sharply. The ride down in the elevator was silent, charged with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Employees stared openly as the CEO and a junior marketing executive stepped into the elevator together, her clearly distressed, him uncharacteristically attentive. James's car, a sleek black Audi with tinted windows, waited in a reserved space near the exit. The driver opened the door without comment, his trained discretion perfect for the surreal situation unfolding. As they settled into the leather seats, Melissa gave Mrs. Wilson's address in Queens, painfully aware of the contrast between her modest neighborhood and the luxury surrounding her. How long have you known? James finally asked as they pulled into traffic. Known what? Melissa stalled, watching the city blur past the window. That I'm his father. She turned to face him directly. I've always known it was possible, but we were careful, and it was just one night, and when I found out who you really were, you decided I didn't deserve to know. There was an edge to his voice now. I decided it would complicate everything unnecessarily, she corrected. You're James Hartwell. I'm nobody. What was I supposed to do? Send a company-wide email? Attention all staff? That one-night stand in Denver resulted in the CEO's heir? A muscle twitched in his jaw. You could have come to me privately. To say what exactly? Congratulations, it's a boy. You made it very clear in Denver that you weren't looking for attachments. You didn't even give me your real name. That was for evaluating employees without the pressure of your title. Yes, I figured that out later. Melissa shook her head. The point is, you weren't honest with me then. Why would I trust you with something as important as my child? Our child, he corrected again, more firmly this time. The city gave way to the residential streets of Queens, the change in scenery reflecting the jarring shift in Melissa's reality. 8 months of struggling alone, of fielding intrusive questions, of juggling daycare schedules and work deadlines. And now, suddenly, Liam's father wanted to claim his rights. When they pulled up to Mrs. Wilson's modest apartment building, Melissa was out of the car before the driver could open her door. James followed close behind, his tall figure drawing curious glances from neighbors unaccustomed to seeing luxury vehicles on their street. Mrs. Wilson opened the door, relief washing over her face. Oh, thank goodness you're here. He's been crying non-stop. Her eyes widened as she took in James standing behind Melissa. Oh, I didn't realize you were bringing company. It's complicated, Melissa murmured, moving past her to where Liam lay in a portable crib, his face flushed with fever, tiny fists clenched in distress. Hey, baby boy, she whispered, lifting him gently. Mommy's here now. At her touch, Liam's crying subsided to whimpers, his hot little body curling instinctively against hers. She was so focused on comforting Liam that she almost forgot James's presence until she felt him step beside her. The look on his face stopped her cold. Awe, wonder, and unmistakable recognition as he stared at the child in her arms. He has your nose, James said softly, reaching out a hesitant hand before pulling back. And my mother's chin. Mrs. Wilson looked between them with dawning understanding. I'll just... "Put on some tea," she said tactfully, retreating to the kitchen. "We need to get him to a doctor," Melissa said, returning to practical concerns. "His pediatrician is 10 blocks from here." "I have a better idea." James was already on his phone. "Dr. Michaels, James Hartwell, I need you to make a house call immediately." He rattled off Mrs. Wilson's address. "Yes, for a child, 8 months old, high fever, thank you." He put his phone away and met Melissa's questioning look. "Family doctor. He'll be here in 15 minutes. You can't just—" "Yes, I can," he interrupted, "and I will, for my son." The words hung between them, irrefutable now that he had seen Liam with his own eyes. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. Dr. Michaels arrived as promised, his professional demeanor betraying no surprise at finding the CEO of Hartwell Industries in a modest Queens apartment. He examined Liam thoroughly, diagnosed an ear infection, and prescribed antibiotics that James's driver was dispatched to fill immediately. Throughout it all, Melissa watched James, the way he listened intently to the doctor's every word, how his eyes never left Liam's face for long, the careful way he hovered without interfering. It was not the behavior of a man who wanted to deny paternity. It was the behavior of someone whose world had just been fundamentally altered. When Liam finally drifted off to sleep, medication administered and fever beginning to recede, Melissa led James to Mrs. Wilson's small balcony for the conversation they could no longer avoid. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked again, his voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of hurt that surprised her. "Honestly, I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing my job, afraid of being seen as the woman who trapped the boss, afraid of having my child turned into tabloid fodder." She looked out over the neighborhood where she'd built her modest life. "I was also afraid you wouldn't care, that you'd offer money to make us go away. I couldn't bear that." "You don't know me at all if you think I would abandon my own child," James said, a rare flash of vulnerability crossing his features. "I don't know you at all, period," Melissa pointed out. "One night in Denver doesn't count. Neither does seeing you from across a conference room or reading about you in Forbes." James was silent for a long moment. "You're right," he finally conceded. "But that changes now." Back in the apartment, Mrs. Wilson was tidying up, casting curious glances their way. "The little angel is sleeping soundly," she reported. "That doctor worked wonders." "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Wilson," Melissa said, gathering Liam's diaper bag. "I'm going to take him home now." "We're taking him home," James corrected, the implication clear in his tone. When Melissa opened her mouth to object, he added more softly, "Please, I've already missed 8 months. Don't ask me to walk away now." The drive to Melissa's apartment was tense, the sleeping baby between them like a fragile bridge across an impossible divide. As James carried Liam's car seat up the 3 flights of stairs to her walk-up, Melissa fought conflicting emotions: resentment at his intrusion into their carefully constructed life, relief at not having to shoulder every burden alone, and underneath it all, a dangerous rekindling of the attraction that had led them to this point. "I'll stay until he wakes up," James said as they entered her small but immaculately kept apartment. It wasn't a question. Melissa nodded, too exhausted to argue. As she watched James Hartwell, billionaire CEO, gently place their sleeping son's car seat on her second-hand sofa, she wondered if the whispers at work would seem like nothing compared to the storm that was surely coming. The next morning dawned with an unfamiliar quiet in Melissa's apartment. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't understand why Liam hadn't woken her with his usual pre-dawn crying. Then the events of yesterday came rushing back. The disastrous presentation, James's revelation, Liam's fever. She bolted upright, heart racing. She found them in the living room, Liam sitting contentedly in James's lap, as the CEO of Hartwell Industries read Goodnight Moon with all the dramatic flourish of a seasoned performer. Liam's fever had broken overnight, and he was now batting at the pages with obvious delight, his infectious giggle filling the small apartment. "He's been up for about an hour," James said without looking up. "Temperature normal. I gave him the medicine and made him a bottle." He finally glanced at Melissa, taking in her disheveled appearance. "You needed the sleep." Melissa ran a hand through her tangled hair, acutely aware of how different this morning looked from her carefully constructed routine. "You stayed all night," she observed, noticing James's rumpled dress shirt and the pillow and blanket neatly folded on her couch. Of course I stayed, he's my son. The simple declaration carried the weight of a life-changing commitment. Also, you don't have a guest room, and I wasn't about to leave you alone with a sick baby. We've managed just fine for 8 months, she reminded him, but without the edge that had characterized their conversation yesterday. And now you don't have to manage alone anymore. James closed the book as Liam began to fuss. With surprising efficiency, he stood and transferred the baby to Melissa. He's probably hungry again. I'll make coffee. Before she could protest, he had disappeared into her tiny kitchen, the sounds of cabinet doors opening and closing following in his wake. Melissa looked down at Liam, who stared back with those unmistakable Hartwell blue eyes. "What are we going to do about your daddy?" she whispered, the word daddy foreign on her tongue. Liam simply grabbed a fistful of her hair in response, his previous distress forgotten. By the time she had fed and changed Liam, James had not only made coffee, but had also somehow produced a breakfast spread that definitely hadn't come from her nearly empty refrigerator. "Your driver has been busy," she commented, eyeing the bagels and fresh fruit. "Daniel is very resourceful," James agreed, sipping from one of her chipped mugs as if it were fine china. "He also brought me a change of clothes and picked up more medication for Liam." The domesticity of the scene was surreal. James Hartwell in her kitchen, their son in his high chair, morning sunlight streaming through windows that desperately needed washing. It felt like a glimpse into an alternate reality, one where they were a normal family instead of a billionaire CEO and his secret baby. "We need to talk about what happens now," James said, breaking the fragile moment. Melissa tensed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm not walking away from my son, and that means figuring out how we move forward, custody arrangements, financial support, how we handle this at work." His expression softened. "I don't want to disrupt your life any more than necessary, but Liam deserves to have his father in his life." The practicality of his approach was both reassuring and terrifying. This wasn't a man making empty promises or dramatic gestures. This was someone methodically incorporating a child into his structured existence. "And what about your life?" Melissa challenged. "You're one of the most eligible bachelors in New York. Your face is on the cover of business magazines. How exactly does a secret baby fit into that perfectly crafted image?" Something hardened in James's expression. "I couldn't care less about magazine covers or public perception. My perfectly crafted image, as you call it, is a means to an end. It allows me to run my company effectively. It's not who I am." "And who are you, James Hartwell? Because all I know is the man from Denver who didn't even tell me his real name, and the intimidating CEO who makes junior executives quake in their boots." James was quiet for a long moment, absently wiping a smear of banana from Liam's cheek with a napkin. "I'm someone who grew up with everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered," he finally said. "My father was exactly the kind of absent parent you seem to think I'll be, delegating his responsibilities to nannies and boarding schools, showing up for photo opportunities and graduation ceremonies." He met her eyes with unexpected vulnerability. "I swore I'd never do that to my own child. I just didn't expect to find out I had a son during a marketing meeting." Before Melissa could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Where are you? Executive meeting in 20 minutes. Hartwell's assistant says he's unreachable. Everyone's panicking. Reality crashed back in. It was Monday morning. They were both meant to be at work, and the absence of both a junior marketing executive and the CEO was already raising questions. "I need to get to the office," she said, showing James the message, "and apparently so do you." James glanced at his watch and frowned. "I had my assistant clear my morning schedule." Well, it seems the entire executive floor didn't get the memo. Melissa was already calculating logistics. Mrs. Wilson couldn't watch Liam today. The regular daycare wouldn't take him with an ear infection, and she couldn't afford to miss another day of work, especially now that her professional life and personal life were colliding so spectacularly. "He can't go to daycare while he's still recovering," James said, reading her thoughts, "and we both need to be at this meeting." He pulled out his phone. "I have a solution, but you might not like it." 30 minutes later, Melissa found herself in the back of James's Audi, with Liam securely strapped in his car seat, heading toward Hartwell Industries. James had made a series of phone calls, speaking in the clipped, authoritative tone that brokered no argument. "This is insane," Melissa muttered as they pulled into the private underground parking. "I can't bring a baby to work. CEOs make the rules." James replied, with a hint of the arrogance that had made him famous in business circles. "And I just made a new one about family emergencies. Family." The word hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to fully address. A woman in her 60s waited by the private elevator, her elegant appearance and composed demeanor marking her as someone accustomed to handling unusual situations with discretion. "Ms. Jenkins, this is Mrs. Carter," James introduced them. "She was my nanny from ages 3 to 12 and now manages household staff for my estate. She'll look after Liam in my private office suite while we attend the meeting." "You want a complete stranger to watch my baby?" Melissa hissed under her breath. "She's not a stranger to me," James countered. "I trust her with my life, and there's no one better qualified to care for our son for a few hours." The possessive "our" still sounded foreign to Melissa's ears, but she had to admit the older woman's kind eyes and professional demeanor were reassuring. More importantly, she had no better options. Mrs. Carter approached with a warm smile. "He's beautiful," she said, looking at Liam with genuine admiration. "Those Hartwell eyes are unmistakable." "You knew?" Melissa asked, surprised. "I suspected when Mr. Hartwell called this morning," Mrs. Carter replied tactfully. "The resemblance is quite striking." With no other choice, Melissa reluctantly handed over Liam and his diaper bag, along with detailed instructions about his medication and feeding schedule. James keyed a code into a separate elevator that opened directly into his executive suite. "Mrs. Carter will stay with him here," he explained as they entered a spacious office that was larger than Melissa's entire apartment. "There's a private restroom with everything she'll need, and my assistant knows not to disturb them." He touched a panel on the wall, revealing a security monitor. "You can check on him any time from your phone. I'll send you the access code." The thoughtfulness of the arrangement was at odds with the James Hartwell that office rumors portrayed: cold, calculating, and utterly focused on business to the exclusion of all else. This James had apparently installed a state-of-the-art security system that could be repurposed for baby monitoring without a moment's hesitation. "We'd better go," he said, checking his watch. "We're already late." "Wait," Melissa stopped him with a hand on his arm. "What are we telling people? About us? About Liam?" James considered this. "For now, nothing. This meeting is about the Baker acquisition, not our personal lives. We'll figure out the rest after hours. And Jessica? The rest of my team? They already saw that photo yesterday. Let them speculate," James said dismissively. "Office gossip is the least of our concerns right now." But as they entered the main executive floor, Melissa realized that office gossip had already evolved into something far more problematic. Jessica stood by the conference room door, her expression a mixture of triumph and malice as she watched Melissa arrive with James. "Well, well," she said, loud enough for nearby staff to hear. "Now we know how some people get ahead in this company." James stepped forward, his height and presence suddenly intimidating. "Ms. Winters, isn't there somewhere else you should be?" Jessica faltered, but only momentarily. "Just heading into the meeting, Mr. Hartwell, like everyone else who actually earned their position." The implication was clear and cutting. As Jessica disappeared into the conference room, Melissa felt the weight of stares from across the office floor. Whispers followed in their wake. The CEO and the single mother arriving together, late after both had mysteriously disappeared yesterday afternoon. "Ignore them," James said under his breath. "None of this will matter by the end of the day." "What does that mean?" Melissa asked, alarmed by his cryptic tone. But James was already pushing open the conference room door, his CEO persona firmly in place. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the delay. Shall we begin?" Throughout the meeting, Melissa struggled to focus on the discussion about the Baker acquisition. Every few minutes, she checked the security feed on her phone, reassuring herself that Liam was content with Mrs. Carter. Across the table, Jessica watched these glances with narrowed eyes, clearly filing away this unusual behavior for future ammunition. Ryan presented the marketing department's acquisition strategy, nodding to Melissa when certain points from her presentation yesterday were highlighted. "These targeting metrics were developed by Melissa's team," he explained, giving credit where it was due, despite his obvious confusion about the dynamics at play. When the meeting finally concluded, James asked Melissa to stay behind. Once the room had cleared, he closed the door and turned to her with an expression she couldn't read. "I've been thinking about our situation," he began, and I believe I have a solution that addresses all our concerns." "What kind of solution?" Melissa asked warily. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and unexpected. "Excuse me?" Melissa managed, certain she had misheard. "It's the logical next step," James continued, as if proposing a business merger rather than marriage. "It legitimizes Liam's position, protects both of us from office politics, and ensures he has every advantage." "Are you out of your mind?" Melissa found her voice, anger rising to replace shock. "Marriage isn't a corporate acquisition you can expedite with the right paperwork." "I'm not suggesting we rush into anything," James clarified, seemingly unfazed by her reaction. "But a public engagement would change the narrative from scandal to celebration. It would give us time to figure out the details." "There's nothing to figure out," Melissa snapped. "I'm not marrying anyone for convenience, especially not a man I barely know who thinks he can solve everything with his checkbook and corporate authority." Something flashed in James's eyes, hurt perhaps or frustration, at having a solution rejected. Before he could respond, the conference room door burst open. Jessica stood there, phone in hand, her expression triumphant. "I knew it," she declared, holding up her screen to display a grainy photo, clearly taken through James's office window, of Mrs. Carter holding Liam. "The office betting pool had it right. The baby is yours, isn't he, Mr. Hartwell?" Time seemed to freeze as the accusation hung in the air. James's face transformed, the controlled businessman replaced by something far more primal, a father protecting his child. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and plucked the phone from Jessica's hand. "Ms. Winters," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you make a habit of taking unauthorized photographs on company property? Because that's not only against corporate policy, but potentially illegal." Jessica paled slightly but rallied quickly. "Everyone deserves to know that she pointed at Melissa, has been sleeping her way to the top. Using her bastard to trap the CEO." "Enough!" James's voice cracked like a whip, causing Jessica to take an involuntary step back. "Ms. Winters, you're fired. Clear out your desk within the hour. Security will escort you out." "You can't fire me for telling the truth," Jessica protested, looking around for support. But the executives who had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion, avoided her gaze. "I'm not firing you for telling the truth," James clarified, his CEO persona fully in command. "I'm firing you for harassment, invasion of privacy, creating a hostile work environment, and violating at least 6 clauses in your employment contract." He handed her phone back. "Delete that photo now or our legal team will be in touch about additional charges." With trembling fingers, Jessica complied, shooting a venomous look at Melissa before storming out. The crowd in the hallway parted silently, no one willing to be associated with her now. James turned to address the onlookers, his expression brooking no argument. "I value the privacy of everyone who works at Hartwell Industries, from the custodial staff to the executive team. That includes Ms. Jenkins and myself. If anyone else feels compelled to speculate about personal matters or spread gossip that creates a hostile environment, my door is always open to accept your resignation." The hallway cleared quickly, leaving Melissa alone with James in the conference room. She sank into a chair, the reality of what had just happened washing over her. "She's right, you know," Melissa said quietly. "Not about me sleeping my way to the top. I earned my position. But Liam is going to be labeled a scandal, a mistake, the bastard son of the billionaire and the nobody." James knelt beside her chair, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Don't ever use that word to describe our son again," he said firmly. "Liam is not a mistake. Unexpected, yes, but never a mistake." His intensity momentarily took her breath away. "What happens now? The whole company will know by lunchtime. By tomorrow, it'll be in the tabloids." "Now," James said, standing and offering her his hand, "we get our son and go somewhere private to figure this out, as a family." The word family still sounded foreign, but Melissa allowed him to help her up. Her head was spinning with implications for her career, for Liam's future, for the careful independence she had built. Mrs. Carter was reading to Liam when they returned to James's office suite. The baby squealed with delight at the sight of his mother, reaching out pudgy arms. Melissa gathered him close, drawing strength from his solid warmth. "Mrs. Carter, would you mind giving us a moment?" James asked. Once they were alone, James paced the length of his spacious office, uncharacteristic nervous energy radiating from him. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. That marriage proposal was poorly executed. It was insane, Melissa corrected, bouncing Liam gently as he began to fuss. You can't just propose to someone you don't even know as a business solution. You're right, James conceded, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair. But I need you to understand something. When I saw that photo yesterday, saw Liam for the first time, everything changed, everything. He stopped pacing to look directly at her. I grew up with parents who saw me as an heir, not a son. Boarding schools from age 7, holidays spent with staff while they traveled, achievements measured in grades and trophies rather than happiness. He moved closer, his voice softening. I always swore if I ever had children, they would know without question that they were loved. That they mattered more than any business deal or social obligation. When I realized I've already missed 8 months of Liam's life, I panicked, hence the spectacularly bad proposal. Melissa studied him, the genuine regret in his expression, the vulnerability beneath the powerful exterior. I believe you want to be a good father, she said carefully, but a marriage of convenience isn't the answer. Liam deserves better than parents who are together out of obligation. What about parents who were drawn to each other from the first moment they met? James asked quietly. Who spent one night together that neither has forgotten? Who created something miraculous together? Melissa felt heat rise to her cheeks at the memory of their night in Denver, the instant connection, the hours of conversation before they'd even touched, the feeling that she'd known him her entire life. That was chemistry and alcohol, she deflected. Not a basis for raising a child together. Then give me a chance to show you there could be more. James's voice held none of the commanding tone he used in the boardroom. This was a request, not a demand. Let me take you to dinner. A real date. No expectations, just a chance to actually get to know each other. And in the meantime, the entire company is buzzing about us right now. Jessica is probably already selling her story to the highest bidder. James's expression hardened momentarily. Let me worry about Jessica and the press. I've dealt with worse. His features softened as he glanced at Liam, who had fallen asleep against Melissa's shoulder. What I haven't dealt with before is finding out I have a son who deserves every chance at a normal, happy life. Normal? Melissa couldn't help the bitter laugh. Nothing about this situation is normal, James. Then we create our own normal, he countered, starting with taking the rest of the day off, both of us. Before she could object, he was already on the phone instructing his assistant to clear their schedules and arrange for his car. 15 minutes later, they were heading out of the city, Liam securely strapped in a brand new car seat that James's ever-efficient driver had somehow procured. Where are we going? Melissa asked as Manhattan receded in the rear-view mirror. My house in the Hamptons, James replied. It's private, secure, and has everything Liam might need. Mrs. Carter has already gone ahead to prepare everything. You can't just decide these things unilaterally, Melissa protested, though her objection lacked conviction. The events of the past 2 days had left her emotionally drained, and the prospect of escaping the city, escaping the whispers and stares, was admittedly appealing. I'm not deciding our future unilaterally, James clarified. I'm offering a sanctuary while we figure it out together. There's a separate guest house on the property if you prefer your own space. The consideration behind the offer surprised her. Perhaps there was more to James Hartwell than the ruthless CEO persona suggested. The house turned out to be a sprawling beachfront estate, secluded behind privacy gates and nestled among ancient trees that shielded it from neighboring properties. As promised, there was a charming guest house just a short walk from the main residence, providing the independence Melissa needed while keeping them close enough for Liam's sake. Over the next 3 days, a strange new rhythm developed. Mornings were spent on the beach, James delighting in Liam's first experience with sand and waves. Afternoons found them in the shade of the massive deck, where James would work remotely for a few hours while Melissa caught up on sleep or reading. Evenings brought quiet dinners after Liam was asleep, where they began the slow process of truly getting to know one another. She learned that James was an accomplished pianist, that he spoke 4 languages fluently, that his intimidating business persona masked a dry wit few people ever witnessed. He discovered her passion for photography, her dream of someday starting a non-profit for single mothers, her encyclopedic knowledge of classic films. On their 4th evening, as they walked along the moonlit beach after putting Liam to bed, James stopped and turned to her. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her back toward the house. In his home office, he unlocked a drawer and removed a small velvet box. Melissa's heart raced, thinking for a moment he was about to propose again, but what he revealed instead was a delicate silver locket. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a tiny black and white photograph of a woman with James's unmistakable blue eyes. "She was the only one who made me feel like more than a Hartwell heir. She taught me that legacy isn't about money or power, it's about the love you leave behind." He closed the locket and placed it in Melissa's palm. "I want Liam to have this, to know where he comes from, but also to know that being a Hartwell doesn't define him, just like it doesn't have to define us." Tears pricked at Melissa's eyes as the significance of the gesture washed over her. This wasn't just an heirloom, it was a promise that James understood what truly mattered, that he wanted more for their son than the cold privilege he had experienced. "James," she began, but was interrupted by her phone ringing. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. "You should take it," James said. "It might be important." Ryan's voice was excited when she answered. "Melissa, where are you? Everyone's talking about the big announcement." "What announcement?" she asked, confused. "The company-wide email from HR. You've been promoted to Executive Director of Marketing Strategy, reporting directly to the board, not to me anymore." Ryan sounded genuinely pleased for her. "And get this, Jessica's NDAs have been finalized. Whatever happened in that conference room is officially buried. She won't be talking to anyone." Melissa looked sharply at James, who was suddenly very interested in rearranging items on his desk. "There's more," Ryan continued. "James Hartwell just announced a new company policy. Comprehensive childcare facilities in every major office, flexible working hours for parents, and extended parental leave regardless of gender or adoption status." When she ended the call, James was watching her carefully. "Before you say anything," he preempted, "the promotion was Ryan's recommendation weeks ago. I merely approved it, and the policy changes have been in development for months. I just expedited them." "And Jessica's NDAs?" Melissa challenged, though without real anger. Self-preservation on her part, James shrugged. Her choice was discretion with a generous severance package or a very public legal battle she couldn't win. "You've been busy for someone supposedly on vacation," Melissa observed. "I wanted to clear the obstacles," James admitted, "to show you that I'm serious about making this work, whatever this ends up being." Melissa looked down at the silver locket still cradled in her palm, a piece of James's history, freely given. Over the past 4 days, she had glimpsed the man behind the CEO, the father emerging from the businessman, and found herself increasingly drawn to both. "I'm not ready for marriage," she said softly, "but I am ready to try, for Liam's sake, and maybe," she looked up, meeting his gaze directly, "for ours too." The smile that transformed James's face held none of his boardroom calculation or public persona polish. It was genuine, hopeful, almost boyish in its intensity. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." From the baby monitor on the desk came the soft sounds of Liam stirring. Without discussion, they moved together toward the nursery that had been fully equipped within hours of their arrival. "You know," Melissa said as they paused outside the door, "we still haven't been on that proper first date you promised." James's hand found hers in the dimly lit hallway. "Tomorrow night," he promised. "Mrs. Carter has already volunteered to babysit." "Is there anything you don't think of?" she asked, half amused, half exasperated by his constant efficiency. "I never thought I'd find a family," he replied simply, "until I did." As they entered the nursery together, where Liam was happily babbling to himself in his crib, Melissa realized that what had started as her greatest fear, the CEO discovering her secret, had somehow become an unexpected beginning. Not just for Liam, who would now have both parents in his life, but for her as well. The gossip at work would eventually die down. The challenges of co-parenting with a man she was just getting to know would evolve day by day. The future remained unwritten, but as James lifted Liam from the crib with practiced gentleness that belied his newness to fatherhood, Melissa knew one thing with certainty. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the moments we least expect. 6 months later, on Liam's first birthday, Melissa stood at the edge of the beach behind James's Hampton house, now their weekend home, and watched as father and son built a lopsided sandcastle at the water's edge. The silver locket hung around her neck, no longer just a piece of Hartwell history, but a symbol of their unconventional journey together. The company's annual report had featured a photograph of the three of them at the opening of Hartwell Industries' first on-site childcare center, a public acknowledgement of their family that had silenced the last of the gossip. Her new position had proven challenging but fulfilling, especially as she helped implement programs for working parents across the company. And as for James, the ruthless CEO had revealed himself to be a patient father, a surprisingly romantic partner, and a man whose capacity for love had been waiting for the right people to awaken it. Their first date had turned into a second, then a 10th, then a commitment to build something real, one day at a time. "Mama, look," Liam called, clapping sandy hands as James added a twig flag to the top of their creation. Melissa walked toward them, camera in hand to capture the moment. No longer the secret single mother, no longer defined by whispers or shame. She was simply herself, stronger for the challenges she'd faced, happier for having taken a chance on trust, and certain that the laughter of her son and the love in James's eyes were worth every uncertain step along the way. "Are you happy?" James asked quietly as she joined them on the sand, his arms slipping naturally around her waist. Looking at the life they were building together, unexpected, imperfect, but deeply real, Melissa smiled. "Happier than I ever thought possible." And in that moment, with the waves lapping at their feet and their son's joyful giggles surrounding them, Melissa knew that some endings were actually the most beautiful beginnings.